So he shot me in the foot. 30 caliber bullet hole. The hole has filled in.
All right, today we got Bill joining us. He's going to share a little bit about his life, his story. So Bill, if you can just start us off with a bit about your childhood, upbringing, parents, things like that.
Well, I was born a year before America got involved in the Second World War. So until I was 6, the only men I saw were 4Fs and old men. I lived with my mother, 2 aunts, and my grandmother on a small farm in northern Maine. But my grandmother was a very strong, industrious woman. Her husband died when she was in her 40s and left her with 8 children. So she had to be a strong woman to raise those children. My older brother and younger sister were alive at that time as well. And I remember one time when we were probably 5, my brother asked me, who do you love more, Grammy or Mother? And I said Grammy, and he couldn't wait to tell my mother. I mean,
Oh no.
and she allowed us how that was okay, so I was off the hook with that one. When I was 6, my father came home. A couple of my uncles came home a little before him because when he came back from North Africa, where he'd been stationed, Libya and Egypt, Iraq, well, all of a sudden we had our mother, our grandmother, and 2 aunts, and we were their world. And all of a sudden this guy comes and he wants our mother's attention, and we got to compete with him to get our share. Or that's the way I felt. And I wasn't happy. I would have been happy if he had stayed in the Army or whatever. Anyway, we moved to a little apartment, and then a few months later, he and my uncle bought a farm in the middle of the state, and we all moved down there. It was a huge farmhouse, and my uncle and his wife and 2 children lived in one half, and my parents and my 3 siblings at this point lived in the other half. My younger brother, Stephen, was born while we lived down there. I went to get the midwife with my father on a horse and sleigh. That was a memorable event. And the next morning we had a baby brother. Kind of looked like a little old man to me. Somebody about 80, but only weighed 6 pounds. We weren't there too long. I went to school 1 year there in the 1st grade. They lost that farm, and we moved back up to the town that my mother and father both grew up in. I went to school the first day and wound up in the wrong classroom. I went in the 3rd grade classroom instead of the 2nd. Had our first report cards. My mother was shocked to see I was in the 3rd grade, and but I had passing grades, so she said, "Go ahead and stay there." And That's how I got to be a year ahead in school, which probably wasn't a real benefit on my part. I wasn't really a good student. Some years later, I found out I was dyslexic, so it might have had something to do with it. Anyway, living up on the hill, the town is called West Chapman, and there's a valley and a hill on either side. And my grandmother lived in the valley on that same road. My grandmother's two sisters had married people who were farmers who had farms. She had one that was closest to town, and then as you start up one hill, her sister and husband had a farm there, and then up on the top of the hill and a little ways back, her other sister. So we had a pretty extended family, which was beneficial in a lot of ways. And when I look back at it and see how our children grew up with virtually no extended family, it was like robbing them of a part of what they should have had. I think the first job every kid has up there is picking potatoes. School goes back early, then you're out for 4 weeks during potato harvest, and everybody works at either picking potatoes, hauling them, or storing them, something to do with potato farming. And the money you earn, you buy your clothing for the year. So the better job you do, the better clothes you have to wear. When I completed the 8th grade, I quit school, which is in Maine at that time anyway. You had to be 16 or successfully complete the 8th grade. So I successfully completed the 8th grade, quit school. First job I got that paid money was I worked in the sawmill that summer. I was 14. Had a lot of friends there, adult friends, and they were mostly Canadian because the guy who owned the mill was Canadian. His brother-in-law was the sawyer. He had two really nice little daughters, and I went home with him on the weekends quite often. The guy who owned the mill, his son was a couple of years older than me, but I was good friends with him, and he used to come out to their farm and spend the weekend as well. So I was enamored with one of his daughters, and his wife and daughters would come to the sawmill some weekends when he would stay there. So I would walk up the railroad track with her 2 or 3 miles, just trying to get up enough courage to hold her hand. And so I guess that was my first attempt at romance. And pretty feeble attempt.
Hey, you got to start somewhere.
That winter, I got a job hauling pulpwood with horses, and the horses were kept in my grandmother's barn. I would get up at 6, go up there and feed them and harness them, then come back and have breakfast and go and get them and stop at spring at the foot of the hill and water them. Then hook them up and head into the woods. And took about a half hour to get to where the pulpwood was, and I would load up, and pulpwood is 4-foot lengths of wood that can be anywhere from a 2-foot stump to a 9-inch stump, and some of it is really, really heavy, so you learn to use leverage and how to maneuver and stuff, and you get really strong. It's like having a job lifting weights. So anyway, I would haul that back to the railroad, only a couple hundred yards from our house, and load that into a boxcar. Boxcar holds about 24 cord, and you had 6 days to fill it, which I always did, but it requires working in the dark sometimes. That job started in the middle of November, and the middle of March starts to get warm enough that crossing the brook, which I had to do, the ice gets a little tenuous, so I had to stop in about the middle of March, and there was still a little wood left there, which I'm assuming they got the next year. I got a job cutting pulpwood with a family, and guy had 12 children. Yeah, I by that time had 11 siblings too. Lived with them and cut pulpwood with my friend, his son, and an older son, and a one-armed guy. At some point that fall, I was living in some old camps with the one-armed guy and one of his sons. One of us had to stay there on the weekend to feed and care for the horse. So the weekend he stayed there. He drank, used to make this stuff called raisin wine. Where you take raisins and sugar and yeast and water, and you turn it into wine. And I don't believe that's known as the Jesus method. But anyway, he was pretty much out of it by the time we came back on Sunday afternoon. So he shot me in the foot in a 30 caliber bullet hole. The hole has filled in. But so I spent a good bit of time in the hospital.
Wait, now how did he manage to shoot you in the foot?
Well, he had a 30-30, and I don't know, he probably thought I was some monster or whatever. So fortunate it was the foot and not something a little higher up. So
Yeah, and was this the one-armed guy who shot you?
yeah,
Well, no wonder he couldn't aim good.
that's right.
He only had the one arm, so it's very lucky for you.
Yeah, it was hard for him to.
If he was a two-armed man, you might not be here.
That's probably true, but I was still limping, but not too much, and I had no pain or anything. The doctor who treated me in the hospital was a Canadian, but he had been in the Korean War and as a doctor and knew how to patch up bullet wounds. So I was fortunate in that regard. He put a couple of pins in there to replace bones that were missing, and which made my foot look more normal. And later on, those pins came out, and that foot no longer looks normal. I thought I would try and get in the Army, and I I signed up to go to Bangor, which is in the middle of the state. It's the biggest city, and that's where people who are joining the Army go to get a physical and so forth. The doctor made me walk the length of the room, 16, 20 feet. He made me do that 2 or 3 times, and he said, "You really want to be in the Army?" And I said, "I absolutely do." So he let me go, and I was on my way to Fort Dix, New Jersey, in basic training. And at that time, I was 5'6", weighed 137 pounds, and was 17 years and a half. Basic training was a breeze because I was in very good shape from working through the planting season. You're lifting 165-pound barrels of potato seed and 50-pound bags of fertilizer all day long. When I was in Bangor, they say, "What branch of the Army would you like to sign up for?" I said, "Infantry." And he said, "Well, you have a L3 profile." That was from the gunshot wound. And you can't be in the infantry. I said, "Well, how about armored?" Can't go there either. "How about artillery?" Can't go there either.
Oh my goodness.
So he says, "Why don't you just go unassigned, and then after basic, you can choose." So after basic training, my choices were a cook, chemical warfare, or medic. And it didn't take me long to choose medic. I didn't want to be a cook. And when you have an L profile, it seemed like an odd job anyway, standing all day. I thought chemical warfare doesn't sound all that appealing. But medics usually have a warm, dry place to stay. So I chose medic, and I went to San Antonio, Texas, Fort Sam Houston. I spent, I think, totally probably 10 weeks there. It's supposed to be an 8-week thing, but it drags out a little longer. And you learn how to be a basic field medic, how to treat gunshot wounds, shock, and broken bones. So after the little medic school, I wound up on a troop ship headed for Germany. And it took 11 days across the North Atlantic in November. And I was sick the entire time. I was sick in the harbor, just from the rocking and rolling. And when you're on a troop ship, you're at the bottom of the ship, and dependents are up on deck, women and children and officers. Being as lucky as I was, my job was wiping black marks from combat boots off the floor of a room they called the movie theater, and that involved ammonia, which didn't help my stomach much. But I found a little deck in the back of the ship, a mezzanine deck they called it, and I could look out at the horizon. There's a little spray come up in the face, calmed my stomach some. And the smart aleck merchant marines saw me one day, and I probably looked green. And he said, "You sick?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, there's a cure for that." And I said, "Really? What is it?" And he said, "A freshly picked blade of grass." And I didn't hit him, but I felt like it.
Yeah, that wasn't too helpful.
But we got to Bremerhaven, Germany. Oh, the first thing I saw land was the White Cliffs of Dover. The first music I heard was from a radio station in England, and it was the Teddy Bears singing "To Know Him Is to Love Him." When we got to Bremerhaven, got off and got on a train for Worms, Germany, pronounced Worms in German, and I spent the next 2 years there. And that was 2 of the most enjoyable years of my life. You know, people would ask, weren't the Germans resentful and blah, blah, blah. And heck no. They looked at Americans more like liberators than they did conquerors. Nobody liked living under Hitler. And although it was still technically an occupied country, we didn't carry weapons downtown or anything. And it's a very enjoyable time of my life. And I met 2 of the nicest girls I've had known or have ever known since, and had long-term relationships with both of them. And I remember vividly even today.
Now you were dating them separately or at the same time?
Separately.
Okay, just want to get some clarification because there could be a little confusion there.
The first one was, the way I met her was this sergeant was taking her friend to the airport in Frankfurt, and he asked me if I would drive because he wanted to romance the girl who eventually became my girlfriend. So I was willing. She wanted nothing to do with him. So at some point he said he wanted to drive, and I got in the back seat with her. Then at the end of the episode, when we were back in Worms, she gave me her number. And a day or 2 later, I thought, wow, this girl is the prettiest girl I've ever seen. And I don't know what she sees in me, but I'm going to give this a try. So I called her, and we decided to meet at a little guest house outside the concern where I was stationed. And at a certain time, and when the time came, it was a downpour. And I went anyway. Looked like a drowned rat coming in to this guest house, thinking no way on earth she's going to show up in this rain, but she did. She was wet, but still really pretty. And so I saw her 2 or 3, 4 nights a week for probably 10 months. And at some point, I had to go on a battalion test in Grafenwehr, and where you go play war games in your battalion. You get tested for your efficiency and so forth. Plus, They were trying out some new equipment that cold weather equipment. So I was there for, I think, 2 weeks, maybe more. When I came back, I was informed that she was seen dating other people. So that was the end of that one. Fortunately, I had a sergeant who was in the capacity of preventive maintenance or preventive medicine, something like it, preventive something. Anyway, he was on leave, and the warrant officer in charge of the dispensary asked me to, he didn't ask me, he told me to do his job. Part of his job was to take the reports from VD patients, which involved trying to identify the woman they got the disease from, and take those to the police station and go through them with the. So the guy I met at the police station, he invited me to dinner at his home, and I went on a following Saturday or Sunday, and I met his wife, one of his sons. The other son was away at university, and his two daughters. One was 16, and I was 18 at that point. Arranged a date with her, so I went with her for a little over a year. The rest of the time I was in Germany. She was just a delightful girl. So I left Germany, went to Fort Hood, Texas to finish out my 3-year enlistment. I was stationed at an evacuation hospital where you do nothing. Every week or so you take a tent out, put it up, let it air out, and other than that you have no job. So I asked if I could go to the hospital, and they're asking for somebody to do physicals or help with physicals. So I went to the hospital and I did audio tests, and mostly put them in a booth and stick a card in a slot, and then everything else was automatic, and you pull the card out and it tells you whether they can hear or not. But I did some by hand as well, where you turn the volume up and they press a button when they hear the sound. And there are a lot of reasons for physicals. If you're getting discharged, if you're retiring, if you're recovering, and other reasons. I don't have a whole lot of experience from there. Killeen is the town nearby. Temple is the nearest big town, and Waco is the nearest really big town. But I did go to Dallas once. We had a Spanish fellow who played classical guitar, and he had a date to play in I think it was a hotel theater. So we went there to hear him play one night. Very, very enjoyable. Went to Temple a few times, had some experiences I wouldn't retell to anybody. I will say I woke up one morning with a pierced ear and a big loop earring with a cowboy in it. And,
And you didn't keep it, huh?
you know, and had a bloody shirt. Anyway, I had a couple of experiences that were kind of like that. And I was glad to leave Fort Hood. I was really homesick for Germany all the time I was there. And so it wasn't a pleasant 6 months. I went to Stillwater, Oklahoma, where my uncle was a supply sergeant for the ROTC, Air Force ROTC, at Oklahoma State University. And I stayed there with them for, I think, 3 months. I had a job working in a potato processing plant, and I operated a little machine that vibrated the small French fries into plastic bags and sealed them off and packed them in boxes, and they went into the freezer. You know, that was very stimulating. I was on a fast track to nowhere, and I decided that I would go back in the Army, which I did. I still wanted to go places, but if after you've been out of the country for 2 years, you have to stay in the United States for a year before you can go anywhere again. So the only place I had to go was Alaska. And being the bright fellow that I am, I chose to spend 2 winters up there and 1 summer. Talked to my wife, and she said, "You need to get a second opinion." And I said, "The last time I asked a doctor for a second opinion, he said, 'You're ugly.'"